Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today are some of the new Clanrats from the Skaven Spearhead box, and rats. I've done these a couple of times on the channel before, and to be perfectly honest, we're not going to push out the boat all that much. These are really simple to do, and the paints will be listed in the description the same as always. So, let's keep it nice and quick. Let's get started. So once you've got your miniatures assembled, the first thing of course is to prime them. Now what I've done here is actually to start with a spray of matte black, and then from above, at kind of a 45-degree angle, I've hit them with a spray of oak brown. Now you might hear this called zenithal priming in some circles. It is a little bit easier with an airbrush, but you can do it with rattle cans just as easily. The idea is that there's going to be parts of the miniature where he's still just a little bit black, where that oak brown hasn't touched, and that's going to give us some very quick natural shading. It's not going to look fancy, not by a long shot, but once it's on the table, it's going to sort of melt together so that your unit of Clanrats will look pretty cool. You can also do this by simply grabbing, spraying in black and grabbing some oak brown from the pot, just quite a heavy overbrush over the top. It's really up to you. You could also just prime him with the oak brown if you want to skip a step. It's not going to make a huge difference, but this is how I've chosen to do it because it will stand out just a little. So the first color that we're going to apply is going to be some fur brown, and for this I'm going to use just a big old brush. Doesn't matter particularly what you're using, and we're going to quite generously overbrush the miniature again, but this time don't worry too much if you're not hitting the very deepest recesses. Just give it a quick flick. Concentrate on areas that are going to be furry, like his legs. His tail is a good one to hit with this. And the idea here is by leaving a little bit of the oak brown in the recesses, we've got sort of a natural buffer area that if we don't hit something with our base colors or we forget to highlight something, again, we've got a little bit of visual interest in those deeper parts, and it takes seconds to do. Now, it's a good idea here to concentrate on parts that are going to be skin or light fur later on. So you'll see on his legs and arms, I've been quite generous with that. Gone back and bapped it a couple of times. But for the clothing or what have you, it's not going to matter too much. We're going to paint that now. Now I'm going to use 3 different colors here. What I'm going to start with, this is deep gray. Let's get him in shot. And I haven't actually thinned this down at all. What I'm doing is just popping this out onto my palette and using quite a rough old brush. You see, I'm not terribly careful about where it's going. When I get near the edge between 2 areas of color, I'll just move away from it and not worry. Now, the idea here is that by using 3 different colors, what I'm going to do is this fella here, I'm going to paint his undershirt, his smock. The base of his color is going to be gray. And then I might do the helmet or the hat or what have you, the cowl on another guy in gray, and just pick a different area on each rat and swap up where I'm painting these 3 colors. You'll see this doesn't take too long, covers very well, and on top of that, we're not worried if it does cover perfectly. So away we go, laying down these first colors. And now I'm going to move on here. I've got desert yellow, and this one too will cover pretty much one coat. It is a little bit thick straight from the pot, but as you see, if you just spread it out while it's still wet, and don't go over the same area too often, you're not going to leave big kludgy brush strokes behind. So I know it flies in the face of most conventional wisdom, but you don't always need to thin your paints. Shh, don't tell anybody I said that though. So the order in which you do the clothing honestly doesn't matter too much. Like I said, just pick a couple of colors that are going to work for your clan or whatever it is you're painting and go wild. Now, a couple of the other rats in the group that you will have seen, I used dragon red here as a 3rd clothing color, but I've also used it as the color on the shields. If you wanted to, you could mix it up a little bit and maybe use pure red on the shields and dragon red on the clothes, but it's not going to matter too much. Now, a lot of these guys are going to have little ropes, satchels, things like that, and a nice quick thing to do with these is a little bit of leather brown. Now I might, for my own guys, actually go up to Paratrooper Tan for some of these little details. But I'm figuring because leather brown and most of these colors are actually quite prominent in a lot of the starter sets, it's probably a little more helpful to see using these colors. Moving on to his skin, what I have is Moonstone skin. And you can be quite rough in applying this because we want a little bit of texture here in some areas. Some places, of course, slow down a little and don't jam it on too thick straight away. Now, Barbarian Flesh is the color that you're going to find in most starter sets. What I would recommend is that you could also start from that. It's not going to make a huge difference, but your ratty will be much more pale than what I'm doing here. Now, given that's kind of the style at the moment, you might prefer that, but I'm going to stick to this. When you come near little areas of fur or fluff on the arms, just paint around them. And don't worry too much if you're not getting a perfect edge near some of those furry bits, because when we dry brush this, it's actually going to bring that together quite well. Man, this guy is difficult to keep on the camera. Now, if there is a step where it's easy to go a little bit overboard, it is this stage. Dry brushing is an extremely useful skill to spend a bit of time practicing. So what I've got here is the moderate dry brush, which is a great name from the Army Painter. Although I do recommend as well, makeup brushes work quite well for this. Anything big and soft, which will take a bit of paint, will work fine. Now, there's not enough paint on my brush there, which is always a bonus. So starting in areas where it doesn't matter too much if you go kind of overboard, just start dry brushing to catch the edges. You see I might be leaving a little bit much there, so I'll go over the sword and then start tickling his tail. What I want to do is catch the edges as much as possible of the clothing and his face. This is the reason why we start from a slightly deeper skin tone, because when we dry brush over the top of it, it's going to pick that up and lighten that up quite a bit. Now, you want to be a little more generous with this than you might think. Don't chicken out. But once you've gone over it a couple of times and picked out the edges of the clothing, then we're ready to move on to the next stage. So let me finish this off. Now that will look a little bit dusty, but like I said, you want to be more generous with it than you might think, but to build that up in a couple of passes rather than just splattering it all in one go. If you are worried about how much you've left behind, it looks like it's a little too much to your eyes, what you can do is get your base coat again, thin it down a little bit, and then just paint it over the bits where you've applied too much of that dry brush. Give it a shot like this first though, like finish a miniature and then get a feel for, do I want to tidy up as I go? Now real quick, death metal is one of the colors that I've used on the metal armor for a couple of the other guys. This fella of course is not wearing any armor. I just want to give it a shout out because I love this color. Really, really deep, brassy sort of thing. It's wonderful once it's got a shade over the top. So if you're wondering how I got the dark armor on a couple of these guys, now you know. This color's not going to appear on this dude, but it's worth having in your arsenal. What I am going to grab is some true copper, and this I'm going to use any brassy or gold details. This is a brilliant base coat for that. On this guy there isn't a huge amount of brassy stuff that I want to do. But for things like earrings, if you spot them on your miniatures, that sort of thing, any little details where you want a bit of warmth, an off gold sort of color, this works beautifully. And then for the silver bits, I'm going to swap to gunmetal. And here is where having a nice stiff brush, like a synthetic tip or something, is quite handy, because being able to just pop a straight, relatively rigid brush into these little gaps for the chainmail is super helpful. And as well, let's not forget he's carrying a sword. Now for his teeth and claws, I'm going to go to Ancient Stone. Now this is a little bit lighter than skeleton bone. If you wanted to, you could just stick to skeleton bone and solidify the color a little bit. I have also seen folks painting the claws in particular in darker, and there's something like Sunburst Yellow, or what is it, Sunburst Ochre rather, from the John Blanche range, will probably work quite well for that, or a dark orange or something, which by the time we finish shading it, is going to look the business. Now to shade them, in my palette, what I've mixed up here, this is half and half speed paint medium and strong tone. Nice and simple. What we'll do is apply this over the entire miniature, and you can be pretty generous with it. You don't want to just drench them in it, bucket it on, and leave it there, but you also don't need to be terribly careful, so a little bit of experimentation here is not going to go awry. The idea is that we're going to cover the entire miniature with this, and then it's going to bring together the colours that we've used, the dry brush. It's going to look fantastic. You can see already, what it does to the shading. So, over everything, and if you get any big clumps of it, just shift it around while it's still wet. Put it somewhere that you haven't yet. And once I have finished popping this over everything, I'm going to find them somewhere nice and warm to dry and leave them for about half an hour. We'll see what we get once this is all finished. Then once he's dry, you're going to have something that looks like this. And honestly, you can just varnish him up, pop a base on him, chuck him on the table with a dozen of his mates. He's going to look brilliant. But we can take it a little bit further, and it won't take a lot of extra work. So there's a couple of things to do before we varnish him, and then one or two to do afterwards, which I'll explain as we go. But first, we're going to pop some rust on him. Now, this is in 2 stages. I'm going to begin here with fresh rust straight from the pot, and grab yourself a scrangly old brush and sort of dab it off until you've got not very much on there. Then, I'm trying to figure out which is the leading edge. So that's the cutting edge. So I want the back of the blade to have a bit more rust on it than the front. So just like that, stipple it on, leave it fairly random. And don't forget, the blade has 2 sides. And then for other parts where you want a little bit of that, what you can do is water down that fresh rust, about 1 part rust to, I put 6 drops of speed paint medium in. It doesn't need to be exact, because it's going to be fairly subtle as it dries. So I'm going to pop it up and leave the bottom hanging parts of the chains, because I figure those are the bits that are going to move around the most to kind of knock off some of the rust. But yeah, just a wee bit of this, and maybe a little of the wet stuff, some of the parts of the blade. Now, eyes can be a slightly tricky one. So what I'm going to do, I've got some dragon red from earlier and a nice fine brush. Here, what you want to do is, I find it easiest to hold them sort of horizontally and approach from the edge of the eye and just draw a straight line downwards. Wee tiny dot. You see, I do not want much on my brush at all while I'm working with this. Now, if you need to, you can tidy up with a bit of your skin tone, like I mentioned, but then grab a bit of dark red tone. Now, this is quite close to Targor Raid Shade, but a little bit stronger. And I'm just going to paint it straight over the eye and into the socket. That way, if you have sort of brightened everything up, it'll bring all that in back to that original color. You can just use strong tone there if you like, but the dark red tone will add a little bit of warmth around the eye socket, which is quite useful. Now, to give his nose a little bit more visual interest, some paint them lighter, some paint them darker. I like darker, but rather than painting it, I'm just going to pop a little bit of dark skin shade over the top. It's not very much, but it's nice and quick, and it's going to give that a little bit more interest from above. Not strictly necessary. Like I said, all of these stages we're just painting to have fun now. Now, once that's finished drying, I'm going to take them outside to hit them with a matte varnish spray. Quite often folks will say, oh, but the washes dry shiny. And a varnish isn't always just about protecting the job. It's about changing the surface of the miniature and giving you a very different effect to your paintwork so far. So, if it's shiny, well, a matte varnish is going to fix that. And there is what a decent varnish is going to do for you. Makes a world of difference, whether you are trying to protect a metal miniatures paint job or you just want to change up how anything looks. Now though, we can do our metal highlights, and it pays to do these after a varnish because then they stay nice and shiny. So going back to the scrangle brush, make sure you don't have to keep every rotten old brush that you've got, but it's worth hanging on to a few of them for jobs like this. What I'm applying is just a wee bit of plate mail metal, chipping along the edges of our rusty sword, I will use the same color and a smaller brush just to pick out some of the chainmail links, particularly towards the bottom where I didn't let the rust effects collect. And also you can use this to highlight the brassy parts too, if you like. Can also use something like true brass. I would suggest if you use death metal, like I had suggested for any of the armor parts, then definitely use plate metal to highlight it. But bronze, you can have a little bit of fun experimenting which color you want to use. And once I'm done with this, that's pretty much it. I'm not going to do anything extra to these guys. So I'm going to go ahead, pop a base on them real quickly, and let's get a look at our finished unit of rats once they're all ready. And so there at last, our rats are complete. And I think you can see there how easy it would be to just swap around one or two of the colors for the clothing and get a very different result. I might in the future, if I was going to do red clothing, swap maybe pure red onto the shields, but by the time you finish the unit, I don't think it matters all that much. It's very quick, very simple to mess around with, and I like the end result. I think that works really well, particularly in a group like this. So as always, thanks goes out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.